Hmm. Hello. Um, so I promised to do something more art-centric. I'm just jumping in without any preparation, so forgive uh, a certain roughness as I make this up as I go along. So anyway, uh, I thought that I should do something with poetry since since I um, changed a film-centric artistry temporarily for a poetry-centric artistry. I think Jean Cocteau and to a slightly lesser extent Pasolini are at least two directors who were also uh, well-respected poets. I can't often think of anyone else. Um, I mean, there's I've heard of some things like Viggo Mortensen. Did has he published some poetry? I mean, perhaps, and has Ethan Hawke is he another actor who published some poetry? I'm sure you'll be able to find so such examples of people from the film industry who have tried their hand at poetry, but I don't think you'll find very many uh, people uh, who have reached a leading position as a poet other than Jean Cocteau. I mean, all of poetry has sort of been thrown away as an art of the past that nobody cares about anymore, so that might be one of the reasons. But anyway, such was my decision some years ago. I think it was in 2012. I decided to uh, just ditch cinema altogether and try this new world of poetry. So anyway, even though in some old video I uh, some of some of the videos that I just generically titled love letters, even though very few of them are love letters as such. They're just sort of um, um, it's just me improvising in flow state. They aren't about any particular subject. But anyway, in one of those videos, I uh, claimed that no poetical form should be more difficult than another. I mean, it's the kind of attitude that Pierre Paul Rubens had towards painting. He thought that whatever genre was just as easy for him as any other. So he just told his patrons that they can ask anything, he can deliver on anything. His talent has no such limits. So anyway, even though I spoke as if that's the case with me as a poet, I think I don't know if I can easily do everything. I mean, if I'd have to start writing rondelets or something like that, I think they might be rather difficult at start, but I think I could do them. But anyway, I thought that I'd do examples of certain poetical forms. Um, and I thought I'd start with haikus from Japan, haiku and tanka poetry. Uh, is it called waka poetry? Does it mean something like? Is it just Japanese for short poetry? I don't know what it is, but I think everyone knows haikus. But the problem with haikus is that in a way they're the easiest poems to write. Even if you know nothing about poetry, you can compose a haiku perhaps a somewhat good haiku even, without too much difficulties. The problem then becomes that because the difficulty level isn't so steep, uh, the form isn't respected as a result. Thomas Tranströmer is a Swedish poet, and I think the last poet to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. He was a person who adopted the haiku form late in his career, but I don't think very many other poets take it. I mean, Alejandro Jodorowsky, the filmmaker and comic book artist, uh, he spoke of liking Twitter as some sort of a modern haiku with its 140 syllable expression. I think, with that example, you can see that haiku is sort of in the popular consciousness, but it's there as a concept. It's not really there as something anyone cares to embrace. I mean, I've heard that people like Matsuo Basho, that their poetry was sort of in vogue in the 60s, although I think that probably has more to do with various kinds of Orientalist things having become fashionable than people, the kind of cafe clutch part of society, dabbles in Buddhism and as Chinese Chinese characters tattooed because there's exotic attractions in something from the Orient. I think if Basho and other haiku masters, let's say, wherever popular, I think it was due to reasons beside their merits as a poet. But let's not get into that. I'm just trying to speak generally about the haiku form. So anyway, like I'm no old school expert in poetry. I very much come from the tradition of free verse. I don't terribly care about any of the classical forms, but let's say I also don't care about the typical free verse. If something like T.S. Eliot or Allen Ginsberg, if things like that are sort of free verse icons, I don't care about following them. The kind of more lyrical expression definitely appeals to me. I just don't like the rigidity of the classical model. Something like the so-called Augustan literature from the 18th century. To me, that's like an art that has so straitjacketed itself that it has nothing to do with the artistic process anymore. Sheridan, the playwright, famously called Dr. Johnson as a writer of Titanic fame in this age of little men. It's more or less how I feel about quite a lot of the classics of the classical poetry. It doesn't appeal to me, but I'm not I'm not comfortably in modernism either. So I'm sort of awkwardly between two chairs. Perhaps I've learned to levitate, or or perhaps this explains why my career is facing certain difficulties, because I insist on acting so difficult, but then again I also insist on seeing this difficult behavior as the most essential part of being a proper artist, and not just being like a garden gnome in someone else's aesthetic garden. So anyway, that was just a rambling introduction to my poetry and certain certain thoughts I have about the haiku form. So anyway, what is the haiku form? Um, it's slightly different in English than in other languages because in a language such as Finnish, which is my native language, and I think Japanese as well, there's a very clear syllable break in the words. So you count syllables in Japanese haiku. So it's 5 syllables for the first, um, 5 syllables for the first line, 7 syllables for the second line, and 5 syllables for the third line. So it's 17 syllables in total. But in English, you don't really have such a, because of the Norman conquest, English is a Germanic language, but because a bunch of French Vikings conquered the German Britain in the Middle Ages, they sort of changed the language so that in a word like taught, in a basic Germanic language, it should be pronounced something more like togt, because the Germanic language is like saying all the syllables, but it's a hallmark of the French language that it has this kind of it just glides over syllables. So I don't know what in Old English, with its hoary seafarers or ancient mariners, as as modern English might call them, I don't know how Old English would say taught, but I guess that it would be closer to togt. But then the French changed the language, and now English is sort of pronounced a bit closer to French. I don't hear anybody talking about this, but I believe this is the case. So anyway, the syllable counting doesn't make any sense in English because in the spoken language it doesn't work. So anyway, we count stresses in English. So just if you have a word like garden, it's 2 stresses. You know that it's 2 stresses because you can't say it with just one line. You have to say garden, not garden. I mean, you just have to know that stuff so you can count the stresses. If you're writing haikus in another language, such as Japanese, count the syllables, but in English, and I presume French, you count the stresses. And the spoken of the language pulls rank on the written. So, I mean, if you've studied French, if you speak French, you know that in their language a word might have an ending that's written like A-I-N-T-E, but that's what should be a syllable, it's just sort of pronounced as E. So if if there's some word like I meant, I-M-E-N-T-E, something like that, that's not a real word. I'm just trying to build something that sounds vaguely like French looking word. Something like that, I meant would just probably the français would just say aimer, and be done with it. There's no problem, je aime. So you know what language you speak, but I'm just trying to say that depending on the nature of the language, you either count syllables or you count stresses. And so anyway, just the form you should keep in mind is the 5-7-5. So anyway, I wrote some haikus as just as an example. Wait. I wrote 3 haikus and 1 tanka. It's actually been so long since I read Japanese literature and any Japanese poetry. I've forgotten what the haiku form or meter is, sorry, not haiku, tanka. So I thought it must be 57577, but if it isn't, I apologize. I was too lazy to check it. So please forgive me. I'm just, I do not care about being a master of Waka poetry. So, if I got it slightly wrong, just don't hold it too much against me. But I'll talk a bit more about my feelings for tanka. But then I read the 3 haikus I wrote. The first one is, silence paints the walls. I sit in an empty house, holding a few dreams. And the second one is, portraits with sealed lips come not from my fingertips. Oh, my winking soul. And the third one is, I speak with my voice. My love speaks with its soft looks. 2 worlds, one of fire. So anyway, those were the 3 haikus I wrote a couple of days ago when I thought of doing this video. And I thought I'd speak a bit about the let's call it the technique of haiku creating. So anyway, the first poem, silence paints the walls. I sit in an empty house, holding a few dreams. Now, what you see in the sort of tone of the poetry is that most of the biggest classics of the haiku seek to find the hidden transcendental level in mundane objects. So Basho, for instance, he wrote a lot about being a traveler. He was walking in his sandals in rural Japan, and he was seeing the flowers and the birds, and he was writing these beautiful little thoughts about them. So anyway, the second haiku that I wrote, portraits with sealed lips come not from my fingertips. Oh, my winking soul. So anyway, I wrote that to show to you that in a way there's no way to fail. So you don't need to stress the content. Haikus rarely rhyme. I think Japanese poetry in general cares very much less for rhyming than Western poetry of the classical variety. Japanese poetry rarely rhymes. Haikus very rarely rhyme, but you can rhyme if you want to. Haikus are rarely comical like that, but you can be comical if you want to. You don't need to take any pressure over the tone. Just write about what you want. Write about your, sock drawer if you want. It doesn't matter. There's no sense in taking pressure over the main tonality, but most people associate the kind of transcendental ambition, such as I had in the first poem, silence paints the walls, I sit in an empty house, holding a few dreams. The main idea in the haiku technique is that you as if make a body of the first 12 stresses, and then the last 5 stresses is, how a joke has a setup and a punchline. The haiku of the transcendental variety has a somewhat similar motor, is that lots of poets make the first 12 stresses into the setup, if you will, and then the last 5 into the, transcendental punchline, if you want to call it that. So anyway, that's one idea, but also you can turn it upside down the way I tried to do in the first poem, is that if there's a turn in the poem between the punch and the setup. You don't have to have the setup first and the punch second. If the motor of the haiku is to shift the situation, you can have the sort of the grace line first. It's more typically done that you'd have the setup, but I'm just trying to show you the possibilities. So anyway, what's the third I wrote? I speak with my voice, my love speaks with its soft looks, two worlds, one of fire. I think in that third one you see most clearly how the third line, two worlds, one of fire, is that the first two lines, I speak with my voice, my love speaks with its soft looks, it's the setup body, and then the last line, two worlds, one of fire, it's as if it exists in a different place and it's meant to comment. It's meant to somehow galvanize what came before and change it. And a lot of, I think haiku has been sort of discredited as a form, but I think it's because it's deceptively easy to write. I think when haikus are great, it's there's a precision to how they achieve their effect. And what you should ideally do if you take the sort of classically transcendental route is that you should try to leave the tension on. So you sort of you give information that leaves more questions than gives answers. Like the first poem I read, silence paints the walls. I sit in an empty house, holding a few dreams. It doesn't obviously give you any hard and fast facts. It leaves the tension on. So you have to sort of roam further inside the poetry. So even though it's briefly stated, if it's to be effective, it's not briefly exited, as it were. So that's just something you might want to keep in mind. And anyway, I read the one tanka I wrote. Hidden behind eyes, a world of wandering dreams. May I reach out for my Bedouin tent can't hold two. I'm saying I'm lost without you. So anyway, the reason I only wrote one tanka is because I actually do not like the tanka form. I've heard lots of haiku poets say the same thing, is that even though the tanka gives 14 more stresses, to me, it's easier to feel the 17 stresses. I like the haiku form. I find it easy to write the words, but the extra 14 stresses, I feel like there's too much room. I feel like it sounds absurd with such a short form as the tanka still is, to say that it's too much rambling in it. But I do feel like it turns into rambling. Lots of people might disagree, lots of people might find themselves better suited for the tanka, but I'm not one of them, and I can't really say anything about the tanka. I do not like the form. But anyway, I just, again, hidden behind eyes, a world of wandering dreams. May I reach out for my Bedouin tent can hold two. I'm saying I'm lost without it. It's as if I tried to have two poems in the, I don't know. I didn't entirely like how it turned out, but I chose to read it anyway because you see how it's somehow, that third line is pretty bad. May I reach out for, because it should it doesn't entirely reach what it's trying to reach. I should have rewritten it, but now it's too late. I don't really care. But anyway, well, I had it in there. I mean, perhaps some feel like they can do something more elaborate with the tanka. But yeah, I don't like it. That's just my opinion. I think the haiku form is pretty cute. I do somewhat like it. But I think the problem with haiku is that it's such a demanding form in a way. It's difficult to have great individuality. Lots of poets, unless you're an Augustan, lots of modern poets go into poetry because they want to be greatly individual. But haiku is the least easily individualistic of the poetry forms. But anyway, I think that I've actually found a way to sort of find a way to have a unique voice in the haiku form. But anyway, I don't know whether you've found the 3 or 4 that I wrote any good, but it's just something I wrote quickly to sort of illustrate this discussion of how to compose haikus. Yeah. So anyway, haikus, they're really easy to write. I mean, perhaps you could you could leave your comments in haikus in the 575 form if you want. Just to prove to yourself that they're not hard to write. But anyway, I'll try to do at least a couple more poetical things. The next one will be on the sonnet, which is perhaps the most European of modes of poetry. Anyway, I'll go straight into doing this in the next video. So thank you for watching, and leave a haiku if you feel inspired.